2014, Aaron Hedges was 38 years old, he lived in Montana, and he was an avid hunter. During the hunting season, Aaron was known to spend almost every weekend or every other weekend hunting in one particular area known as the Crazy Mountains, or the Crazies for short. The Crazies are a mountain range in Montana that are actually disconnected from the Rocky Mountains. So they're very isolated, and they're beautiful, but they're incredibly rugged and very steep. Aaron knew this area like the back of his hand because he was there all the time hunting. In fact, he was there so often that he began placing caches of sleeping bags, food, water. He cached this all over the Crazies. And he knew how to get to his cache points without the use of a map. He just could look around and know where he was, and he could walk to his cache point. On September 3rd, 2014, Aaron, along with two of his close friends, decided to go on a hunting trip to the Crazies for a week. They planned on staying right next to this lake called Campfire Lake, but in order to get to it, they had to hike into the Crazies. You could not drive a car to where they were going to stay. So they got 2 horses and a pack mule, and Aaron loaded much of his gear onto the pack mule. And so they begin this hike up to Campfire Lake. And a little ways into this first day hike, the mule spooks at something and runs away. In the process of running away from them, it ditched all of their equipment all over the place, and they couldn't recover it all. Now, after they gathered up what they could and got the mule back and continued their walk, Aaron decided he didn't feel like going to one of his cache points to try to retrieve an extra sleeping bag, and he said, I'm just gonna use whatever extra gear you guys have, I'll make do. And so they continue on, they get to Campfire Lake, and they set up their camp, and for the first couple of days, everything is going just fine. On the 3rd day, Aaron decided that, you know what, I could tough it out, but I'm just gonna go north to one of my cache points and get that extra sleeping bag and try to get a few other things that were lost and make my living arrangements a little bit more comfortable while I'm here. And so his 2 buddies, they know that Aaron is in this section of the Crazies all the time. And so they didn't bat an eye when he says he's gonna go off on his own. It wasn't a very far distance to this cache point. They said, okay, we'll see you later tonight. So Aaron takes off, and after a little while, one of his buddies, for whatever reason, uses his radio to reach out to Aaron. The walkie-talkies they were using had this LED screen that anytime you transmitted traffic on it, it would register your GPS location and transmit that to the person you're talking to. So when he hailed Aaron at about 10 in the morning after he had left to go up to his cache point, when Aaron radioed back, it showed up on their LED screen that instead of going north to this cache point, he had deviated and gone very far to the east. And he would say on the radio, Aaron would say back to them, hey guys, I got mixed up and I missed the turn to go up to the cache point. I'm trying to find the trail to get back to the cache point. But they expect him, based on what he said, that he was just going to turn and go to the cache point and come back to where they were at some point that night. But here's the first weird thing about this case. Aaron got turned around and basically missed the turn at this really obvious fork in the trail. If you go this way, you'll get to your cache. If you go this way, you'll end up where Aaron is, and it's the complete wrong way. And you know it's the wrong way because on your right-hand side, if you're going this way, there's going to be a creek on your right. Whereas if you go towards the cache, you're going uphill and there's no creek. So for Aaron, in perfect weather conditions, to have missed a very obvious fork in the road that he knows well is a little bit strange. Not to mention where he showed up on their GPS when they talked to him on the radio, he was a ways down the wrong direction. He would have been next to that creek for long enough that he should have already turned around. It's like making a wrong turn and going 45 minutes to an hour in the wrong direction when you already know it's the wrong direction. Why are you still going that way? But his friends were not that concerned. They had just spoken to him on the radio. He's saying, I got turned around. They're expecting him now to show up a little bit later in the day, maybe in the evening at some point. So that night when he doesn't show up, they try radioing him and they can't get through to him. And they decide that, you know what, it's not that easy to call authorities. They didn't have cell reception out there, and it would have been about a day's hike before they could even get to a place where they could call authorities. So they decide, let's just stay here tonight. He could show up at any point in the middle of the night, and tomorrow, if he's not here, we'll go looking for him. The next morning, his friends get up. This is on September 6th. There's no Aaron. So they head off in the direction of this cache, and they start looking for Aaron. And all day, they're calling for him. They're trying to radio him. Nothing, no sign of him. The following morning, on the 7th, they do leave the area. They give up on their hunting trip, and they head out of the Crazies to contact authorities. Authorities launched this massive search for Aaron. But as soon as they launched this search, this massive storm rolls in, dumping 2 feet of snow within the first 12 hours of their search. So they really weren't able to accomplish much in those first 2 days, which brings us to September 9th. One of the main areas that they were looking for Aaron was following that path that he had gone down, the wrong path away from his cache. They followed that path down along that creek and were looking for anywhere along the creek that he might have been. And there was this cliff that overlooked the creek, and on this cliff, next to a tree, they found Aaron's boots, neatly placed side by side as if put there intentionally. Next to his boots was a very obvious fire pit where someone had started a fire. In the fire pit was a cigarette container that was Aaron's brand. It looks every bit like Aaron had been here, smoked a cigarette, took his boots off for some reason, and had been sitting next to this fire. Also next to the fire was Aaron's Camelback water bladder, as well as some of the straps that went to his backpack that had been burned inside of the fire pit. But there's no sign of Aaron or his remains anywhere near there. Also, the people who found the boots in the fire said that we were in this specific area over the past 2 days. This wasn't here. At this point, investigators believed that Aaron must have been suffering from severe hypothermia, where in severe cases, people are known to actually strip their clothing. And so searchers created a new search area based on his boots, thinking he had to have been at this fire pit smoking a cigarette. He took his boots off because he's got hypothermia, and he wandered off, but he can't have gotten far. We're talking 2 feet of snow on the ground in rugged terrain, and he's barefoot. But despite searching extensively in their new search area, they couldn't find Aaron or any sign of him. 9 months later, a family, the Rhines family, who lived near the base of the crazy mountain range, they were doing their yearly maintenance on their fence that went around their entire property. And one of the family members decided to take a break from the work and walk up into the crazies just a little ways up to just sit on the mountain and look out across the land. It was a beautiful view. And as he's walking up, he gets about a mile from the property itself, and he spots an orange vest under a tree. And so he figures a hunter must have lost their gear. So he walks up and he sees that not only is there an orange hunting vest laying on the ground, but there is a backpack that would turn out to be Aaron Hedges' backpack leaning up against a tree, as if placed there on purpose. Inside of the pack was Aaron Hedges' wallet and license, along with a loaded gun and food and water. Next to the pack, there was this rock. And on the rock was a thermos that was open, along with an open energy drink, as if Aaron had set his pack down and then sat on this rock and was sipping an energy drink out of his thermos. If Aaron had been sitting on that rock, as it appears he was, you can clearly see the Rhines property a mile away from you. It's right in front of you. It would be impossible not to see. Additionally, this location was 6 miles away from where Aaron's boots were found. So all of Aaron's gear is brought to the authorities, who go out and they look for Aaron, and there's no sign of Aaron in the area. Another year would go by and a couple of horseback riders would be riding past that same area where the backpack was found, and they see a human skull sitting underneath a tree. Sure enough, it winds up being Aaron Hedges' skull, and his skeletal remains were all there, except for his feet. His feet were never found, but the coroner could not determine a cause of death. So a couple of questions come to mind. How did Aaron, a guy that knows the crazies inside and out, make that wrong turn in the first place? He should have known better. But even if we say he got turned around, it can happen to the best of us, he would have known he was going in the wrong direction because the creek would be on his right, but he kept going because we find his campsite with his boots way down the path that was in the wrong direction. But even if we're willing to accept that as why he was at that campsite, he took off his boots. And then he walked 6 miles in 2 feet of snow to a location that was literally looking at safety. The Rhines property is right there. You have food, you have water, and you're sitting there drinking a drink. You have a loaded gun, you can fire it into the air to try to get someone's attention, but you don't use your resources, you don't go to safety, you die. In 2018, Terrence Woods was a 27-year-old filmmaker / journalist who had, ever since graduating college, traveled the world, filming in locations that are very rugged and sometimes quite dangerous for these documentaries and TV shows that he was known to work on. In October of that year, Terrence was going to travel to Idaho, with a production company called Raw TV. They were doing a TV series around an abandoned gold mine called the Penman Mine. Penman Mine was located in an area that is quite rugged in the middle of the backcountry. Terrence had previously worked on 2 different backcountry shoots. One was done in Turkey and the other was done in Alaska. So he wasn't an expert by any means, but he was accustomed to being out in the wilderness to do some of these shoots. Prior to leaving for the trip, he had texted a number of his friends and just said he wasn't really that excited about going on the trip. His friends would later say to investigators that his language was not alarming. He was just kind of complaining about not wanting to go on a particular work trip, so it didn't stand out to them at all. Terrence arrives in Idaho in early October. He texts his father to let him know that he's landed, he's made it to the hotel. Everything seems to be going normally. He was supposed to be there until mid-November, and that's what everybody in his circle was expecting. So on October 5th, when Terrence sent a text to his father that just said, "I'm going to be coming home on October 10th," and there was no explanation, his father wondered why. And so he wrote a response and said, "Why are you cutting your trip short?" But he never got a response because Terrence had actually already left for the day on October 5th to go do a shoot at this mine, and he'd be out of cell phone reception. On October 5th, the crew that was around Terrence all day reported that he was acting very strangely. He was very quiet, withdrawn, wasn't really talking to anybody. And at the end of the day, when they were wrapping up shooting, one of the producers was sitting in a vehicle waiting for everyone to kind of finish up, packing up, and Terrence said he wanted to go relieve himself. And he walked over to the edge of this cliff, and for whatever reason, this producer, he didn't know why, but he just thought he needed to look to see if Terrence was okay. And he turns to look where Terrence was standing at the edge of this cliff, and Terrence isn't there anymore, and he sees Terrence's radio is now sitting on the ground standing there. And there was just something about the scene that he saw that he instinctively knew something's wrong, and he actually ran up the cliff in case Terrence had fallen off of it. But when he got to the edge of the cliff and looked over, he was shocked to see that Terrence was down there, about 15 feet down, but wasn't laying on the ground like he had fallen. He was sprinting down the hill, not saying a word, not looking up, running at full speed down the hill into the forest. The producer didn't know what to do. He kind of yelled to some other people and said, "Hey, what's Terrence doing?" No one knew. And so the producer and somebody else also began chasing after Terrence. But after a little while, they couldn't catch up to him, and they were worried that by chasing after him, they might scare him. And so instead, they immediately go and they call authorities, and this huge search is launched for Terrence. So for a week, you have all these people looking for Terrence. You have people on foot, you have dog teams, you have a helicopter with infrared technology. You have all these people combing this area, and there's no sign of Terrence. One of the search and rescue officers commented that it would have been so hard to get away from this search because the ground inside of that forest was so covered with fallen trees that there were times where you were just walking on fallen trees. You weren't even touching the ground. And so the idea that Terrence could run in there and effectively evade this massive search that had kind of encircled the area, it just didn't make any sense, but there was just no trace of him. And to this day, we have no idea where he went. There's never been a sign of what happened to Terrence. He just started running away for reasons we don't understand and disappeared. On the same day that Terrence Woods goes missing, 56 miles away in the same mountain range, a 76-year-old woman named Connie Johnson also goes missing under very strange circumstances. Connie was an outdoors woman through and through. She had previously worked as a wilderness ranger for the U.S. Forest Service, and she was known to take young people out on trips along the backcountry and teach them how to survive. Her friends said that she had tremendous survival skills and spent much of her time alone in the woods. Connie was working as a camp cook for Ritchie Outfitters. It was a company that organized hunting trips in the Idaho and Montana backcountry. The camp that she was actually working at was not accessible by vehicle. You had to get there on foot or on horseback. On October 2nd, all of the hunters at the Ritchie Outfitters camp that she was working in left for a 3-day hunting trip. They said bye to her and bye to her dog Ace, and they were gone. She was the only person at the camp. The following day, they got a very strange radio transmission from Connie. They couldn't understand what she was saying. They couldn't tell if she was mumbling or if there was something wrong, or maybe it could have been the radio. But when no one could understand what she was saying, they ultimately said, "Okay, I'm sure she's fine." And so a couple days go by, and on October 5th, the hunting party returns to the cabin, and Connie's gone, as well as her dog Ace. They're both gone. All they could find was Connie's jacket was laying over her gun that was sitting on a picnic table. That was it. A very intense search was launched that included the National Guard, the Air Force, helicopters, dog teams, ground searchers. They couldn't find her or her dog. And so on October 16th, they called off the search. 3 weeks later, Ace, her dog, would show up 15 miles away from where they had gone missing. The dog was emaciated, but was okay. They fed the dog, and then they tried to get the dog to help them find Connie, but to no avail. To this day, we have no idea where Connie went or why she left the camp to begin with. In February of 2008, the Pilkington family, which was David and Camilla, along with their 2 sons, Timothy and William, who was 7 years old, were on vacation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. They were staying in this tiny little town called Tofino, which was at the end of one of the peninsulas on the island. There was maybe 20 streets in the town. There was only a handful of places that you could stay. Everybody knew everybody on the island. I mean, it was really a tiny place. One morning, David wakes up early and decides he wants to take both of his sons down to one of Tofino's beaches. And so he gets Timothy and William, they walk over and they go down this flight of steps that leads down onto the beach itself. And when they get to the bottom of the steps, William says he wants to stay at the foot of the stairs. Timothy wants to go actually walk around the beach with David. And so David couldn't convince William to come with him and with Timothy. And so he says, okay, William, you stay right here. I'm gonna go with Timothy for a couple of minutes and walk around the beach. So David and Timothy walked only about 10 or 15 meters away from William, who was just standing at the foot of the stairs, just watching his dad and his brother. And at some point, David would say that he turned his back on his son. He said it was maybe for a minute. And he was looking at Timothy and they were doing whatever they were doing. And then when he turned around, William wasn't there anymore. And so David instinctively runs over because there's nobody else down there. There's nowhere really for him to have gone. But he runs over, he's looking on the sides of the stairs. He can't find his son. You know, he's looking where he could have gone, and it only made sense for him to probably go up the stairs. It wouldn't have been long enough for him to get into the water. It had only been about a minute he had turned his back. And so he goes up the stairs, he's looking around, he can't find his son. And this huge search is launched for this boy because this just happened. It's a very small area. They figure they can find this kid. The main area they were going to look was inside of the forest. Tofino had a very dense forest right in the middle of it. And since the beach butted up against the forest, they figured that the boy could have walked up the stairs and made it into the forest in that 1 minute that his father's back was turned. And so after an exhaustive search of this forest and there's no sign of him, unfortunately investigators began to look to the beach and were waiting for a body to wash up on shore because historically the only people that ever went missing in Tofino were either found in the forest or they washed up on the beach. Those are the only 2 places you can go. There isn't anywhere else you can go. But the boy never washed up on a beach and they never found a shred of evidence ever in the forest where that boy was. He just vanished. So unfortunately, like basically all of the missing 411 cases, you have a baffling set of circumstances with no clear resolution. We don't know what happened to these people, and we probably never will. But that doesn't stop us from theorizing about what could have happened. So I'd love to hear in the comments, and I'll get back to as many of you as I possibly can. If you want to learn more about Missing 411, I do have a playlist just called Missing 411. Or what I would suggest is going right to the source. Check out David Paulides and his book series called Missing 411. I provided links below of how to get his books. I've also provided his YouTube channel in the description as well. So please go check out David Paulides and his team at Can-Am Missing Project. They're amazing, and it's why we have any of this information to begin with. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, I would ask you to politely take an M67 frag grenade, pull the pin, and gently lob it towards the like button. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you have a story suggestion, we have a subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. I check it every single day, and if I intentionally use your story suggestion, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is JohnBallen416. I also just started a Twitter account where my handle is also JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, or here on YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya.